Hey everyone, welcome to week 6 of our series, Good News. Everyone needs good news. And not just for a little while or for a few people, but for everyone and for always. This week, the good news is this: we don't owe anything. Glad you're here. Listen, we've been in this series, Good News. I have another round of good news for you today. We're doing this out of the book of Romans, this letter that was written from a guy named Paul to a group of first century followers of Jesus whose lives have been turned right side up in the direction of Jesus. So if you have your Bible and you want to find your place, Romans chapter 5 is where we're going to begin. Actually, probably Romans chapter 6, somewhere in there. I don't know, I'll figure it out in a minute. 5 or 6 right here in just a few minutes. I have some good news. Now, we've gone through a lot of good news, but to really experience what we're going to talk about today, you're going to need your imaginations. Okay, so whatever you may need to do to give your full attention to your imagination, to get crazy creative here in just a moment, I just settle in for a minute. Everybody ready? Everybody good? Okay, I want you to be brave, and this is a risky move for me too. I'm gonna ask you to close your eyes, but later I do expect you to open them again, okay? So that time is coming in a little bit. For right now, I just want you to close your eyes, and I want you to take all of your senses and imagine your way in to the very end of 8th grade. All right, some of you have to go back farther than others. It's totally fine. You gotta work back through all that wisdom you've acquired and get back to 8th grade you, okay? I don't know what your classroom was like, but I do know this. Every single one of us knew exactly where the clock was located on the wall. Every one of us. And this day, here's what I'd love you to do, is go back to the day in 8th grade that was actually the very last day of 8th grade. All right, place yourself right in the seat. How hard was the chair? Where were you in the room? What was the temperature where you lived at that time? In every sense, you can place yourself right there, the last day of 8th grade. You can kind of hear the shuffling of students around you. The teacher's talking about something and you stopped listening a while ago. You're just right there in this moment, all right? Now, in your imagination, you're sitting in your chair. You can look around the room. You can see the people. You can see the place. You can imagine all the way through this. You look up at the clock and you realize it is approaching, way too slowly, but it is approaching the last minute of the last day of 8th grade. You watch that second hand, and as it climbs to the top of the clock, it seems to go slower and slower, and you think it's never gonna make it. Finally, it hits the top, the bell rings, and 8th grade is over. What do you do in that moment? What happens in that moment? Right? What are you sensing in that moment? All the tests, all the homework, all the obligations, all the things of school left behind, and now it is this beautiful thing called summer break, right? Like the greatest thing an 8th grader can imagine. You run out. I just want you to spend 10 seconds imagining, what do you do for the next 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 days? What sense rises up in you as all of that obligation falls away, as all the stress, all the preparation, all the alarm setting, all the maybe uniform wearing for some of us, right? What happens? Okay, here's what I want you to do. Turn to someone around you, even if you've never met them, and just tell them, what do you do for the next 2, 3, 4, 5 days? What are some of the things you're not gonna miss out on for the next few days? Go. Listen, in that moment, so many things changed, right? It's this massive shift from the school year to the summer, and so many things changed in that moment. Now, maybe for some didn't. Let's just play around with imagination for just a minute. How many of you imagined, okay, I'll enjoy the weekend, but on Monday morning, I'm getting up at the same time, I'm going back to that school, I'm gonna sit in that chair till that teacher gets there? How many of you did that? Anyone? No one? Really? Why not? Because it's summer, right? All that obligation, when you've met all the obligations, when all of that falls behind you, it's time for something else, right? Now, we could have gone a little bit closer to home for some of us. This might be harder for others to imagine. What if one day you go to your mailbox and you open a letter and it's from the mortgage company? Now, normally, you know what this looks like. It looks like everything else, right? So maybe you're auto pay and you just file it away, or maybe you fill out the check each week. But one day you open that and you scan down to the bottom to the bold numbers, because who knows what all the other stuff is. And the bold numbers where it says balance due comes to zero. That's pretty awesome. Tell the person next to you what you're spending that next check on right now. Here's what I don't think anybody's doing. You're like, you know what, just one more. I think I'm just gonna send the mortgage company one extra. So grateful for their diligence in pursuing my money. No, it's crazy. When the debt is paid, when the balance is zero, you stop paying, right? And all of this possibility emerges. All of this opportunity, all of this freedom, right? When you run out of 8th grade, papers flying in the air, backpack thrown in the garbage, sprinting to the car, imagining diving into the pool or going to the friend's house or sleeping till 10 or whatever you might do with that freedom, all of that comes into the picture, right? When that one payment a month finally finds its way off and you're debt-free, at least in that aspect, you step into this like, whoa, the possibilities. There's just so many. Right? This is the beauty of what we see in Romans chapter 5 and 6. This sense that rises up in us, this memory maybe some of us have about the clock ticking and the bell ringing, stepping into all the freedom and possibility of summer. Or for some who have experienced and celebrated the balance hitting zero on any particular debt and the freedom that that creates. This is what Paul points us to in Romans chapter 5 and 6. Now, we've been saying this for a number of weeks that, listen, there's good news for everybody. The thing about the news right now is it's full of bad news, or if it does have good news, it's only for a few and it's only for a little while. But in Jesus, we have good news that's for everyone and for always, because all of us are called to belong, all of us are loved deeply by him, and all of us can find our way, most of all, into relationship with him. Not a list of behaviors, not a religion, not just a code of conduct, but instead of relationship, interactive, every day, all the time, moment by moment, him putting us together, walking with us through the hardest stuff and the best stuff all along the way. And we've been saying, listen, we need this because everybody has a challenge. We all have the same problem. Stuff's been wrecking our lives. We said it this way last week, that when we want to do the right thing, sometimes, if we're all just honest, we just don't do it. And when we don't want to do the wrong thing, no matter how hard we try, sometimes we still do it. We're in the midst of this struggle. But God meets us right in the middle of that, not expecting us to ever make ourselves right. And we said it this way one week, it's God who sets us right. He steps into relationship with us and lives along with us. And that changes everything. Like the switch when the second hand hits the top and the bell rings. The change in our posture and our mode the moment we find our way into relationship with Jesus. Freedom, possibility, partnership, and setting behind an old way is exactly the picture Paul paints for us. Now, he acknowledges some of the problem that we found along the way. In Romans chapter 5, verse 18, I'd love for you to check out 5 sometimes. He builds these two columns of what happens without Jesus and what life with Jesus looks like. He does it in the way of this story of the first man, Adam, who was the first among us who turned our backs on God. He uses this word sin that some of you who may be finding your way back for the first time, you're like, listen, I know that's just like doing wrong. But sin actually means more than that. Sin means, it means missing the mark. It means whatever you were intended for, you come up short. Now, some people think that God thinks we were intended for perfect behavior, and that's not it at all. We were actually intended for perfect, uninterrupted relationship. And sometimes wrong behavior wrecks that. Anybody ever have a relationship wrecked by wrong behavior? It wasn't the behavior that was the biggest problem. It was what it did to the relationship, yeah? Right? That's what wrecks it. Even people who don't follow Jesus know this, right? When you step into a friendship with someone, you don't have to call it sin, but when they lie, trust is destroyed, right? The Bible says it this way, sin, missing the mark, kills stuff. This is what happened in relationship. And so in Romans chapter 5, verse 18, it says this, yes, Adam's sin brings condemnation for all. The relationship with all of us with God was wrecked by sin. The relationship was broken. It wasn't about doing right, doing wrong, and measuring up. It was about connection. and that was broken. But he says this in verse 18, he says, but Christ's one act of righteousness brings right relationship with God and new life for everyone. What sin does is it puts us in this cycle of breaking stuff over and over and over, just wreck stuff, and we feel stuck, like we talked about last week. But what Paul is saying is that what Jesus did in his death, burial, and resurrection is that he paid for everything so that, like the second hand hitting the top of the clock, everything could change. Freedom and possibility could enter our lives again. And so if I were to put this in common language today, here's the good news. You don't owe anything anymore because Jesus paid for everything. Whatever might keep us stuck in addiction, Jesus can overcome it. Whatever might keep us stuck in disconnection, self-harm, or distance from people that we love, Jesus took care of it. He can walk us through it. Anything that would keep us separate from God, Jesus paid for it so he can step in and give us the strength we need to live in the freedom and possibility of healthy relationships, a full and confident identity, real impact in the life around us, meaningful work, meaningful relationships with one another, right? A kind of health that the struggle and strife of achievement or trying to climb some sort of ladder or accumulate a certain amount of money or a number of experiences or a certain amount of notoriety that can never satisfy. Jesus says, no, I'll walk you through all of this. What he's saying in a word in Romans 5 is the good news. You don't owe anything anymore. The balance hit zero. The bell rung. New things can emerge. I say it this way when I go back to the Midwest. I tell everyone it sounds like this. You don't have to live like this. It doesn't have to be this way. All right, those of us who have made it out, we know. Those of you who are visiting, good on you. But for real, someone at your coffee shop this week, someone in your business, someone in your neighborhood, who you can just see the weight of the world on their shoulders. You can see the struggle. You can hear the desperation and the longing to really be the great parents they dream to be, or to have the kind of relationships that they had always imagined for themselves, to be at a different season of life. We get to show up because of Jesus and say, listen, it doesn't have to be this way. You don't have to be stuck. You don't have to live like that anymore. What Paul is saying is that what Jesus did creates a whole new sense of freedom and possibility. No more being stuck in the chair, listening, passing tests. Instead, freedom and partnership to run together. No more taking the bulk of our attention or energy and offering it to achievement or any of these other things. No more writing that massive check to that kind of thing. The debt has been paid and we step into a new kind of freedom. Now, what he's gonna do in Romans chapter 6 is we're gonna take this turn all together, that what we've been saying is what Jesus accomplished changes everything. We all have this challenge. It's not all on us. God made everything right. We'll find our way through. It's all about relationship. Now, at some point, that is gonna find its way into our day-to-day behaviors. But one more time before we make that turn in the next couple of weeks, he's gonna say, this all has to do with relationship. Because when we change relationships, our behavior changes too. He says it this way in Romans 6. Here's the question he asks. Should we keep on sinning so that God can show us more and more of his wonderful grace? That's crazy talk. Why would we do that? Or you could ask it this way. Should we keep going to class so that we have the opportunity to finish homework and take tests in the summer? Should we keep on paying the mortgage to stay in discipline even though the debt has been paid? Who would do that? That's crazy talk. Things have changed. Listen, there was a time in our lives where us doing our very, very best, us striving, struggling, grappling, climbing for our own self-satisfaction, or to make our relationships the way they are, to make our work the way that it's supposed to be, or do those things on our own. We all know what we got for that. Like, this is what makes us followers of Jesus. We ran that course long enough to realize that's lousy. It wrecks stuff. It's exhausting. And it never says so much promise, so little delivery. And so he says, listen, if you point your life in the direction of Jesus, it would make no sense to keep acting the same way. We'll just keep getting the same results. You can't just tack on this thing, Jesus, to life as it was. Because if we step into a relationship with him, everything changes. We don't go to class in the summer. We don't keep paying the bill when the balance hits zero, because where we belong and our commitments determine how we behave. I would say it this way, that when our relational commitments change, so does our behavior. This is the beginning of what Paul's gonna start to turn for us. What we've been saying for 5 weeks is good news. God has done so much, everything can change for the best. We're gonna start to find our way into how do we participate in that? How do we cooperate in that? Jesus does the hardest work of rescuing us. We do the simpler work of being grateful and responding. But in that turn, we cannot miss the turn. What changed is not our behavior. What changed is our relationships, and because of that, our behavior follows. It's like this. Simple question. I hope everyone can get this right, especially the guys. Should a married man continue to act like a bachelor? Probably not, right? I'm gonna give it a solid no. Why? If you are unclear, ask, never mind. There are people to ask, but be careful, right? When your relational commitments change, your behavior changes. Not because you're somehow like burdened by that or trying to earn that, but you've stepped into something that you are committed to and want to respond to. You want to see that thrive. You've chosen something different for your life ahead. And so while it may be tempting at times to behave like never do the dishes or any other stereotypical behavior a bachelor might behave in, no, you stepped into something different. We change, we reorient. Parents of newborns, does life change when your relational commitments change? Yup, they sure do, right? You gotta reorient. Retirees don't show up at work anymore. Your relational commitments change. When kids go off to college, they do their own laundry. Please, for the love of all that is good and holy, do your laundry. Right? Our behavior changes when our relational commitments change. And what we've been invited to with Jesus is a change in relationship. That when God enters, when we can have uninterrupted, moment by moment, always connection with God, of course it's gonna have implications for our behavior. Why would we keep doing the things that hurt us or others? We have a whole new strength, a whole different partner, a whole different kind of cooperation with God. So we are no longer bound to an addiction. We are no longer bound to workaholism. We are no longer bound to proving our identity or acquiring attention online. We are no longer bound to step into self-defeating relationships. We're no longer bound to the trauma that we've experienced. There's a way through that and a different kind of strength to find our way into a different kind of health. So just like many of you said, when Paul asks, well, should we keep on sinning so that grace can increase? Here's what he says in Romans chapter 6. He says, of course not. That's crazy. Since we have, catch this, I love this, we've died to sin. It's not just that the balance hit zero. It's not just that the bell rang. It's that there was a death of an old self. And that's when debts no longer apply. It's that severe, this picture that he is painting. Since we have died to sin, how can we continue to live in it? Or have you forgotten, he says, have we forgotten that when we were joined, you see that relational word, this is like a marriage kind of word. When we were joined with Christ Jesus in baptism, we joined with him in his death. For we died and were buried with Christ by baptism. In fact, some friends are gonna baptize a family member here in just a little bit. It's such a cool picture of being buried underwater, an old self dying and raising to a new kind of life. At death, no one collects, well, someone else has to pay, I suppose, but you no longer owe anything. There's freedom from that. All those commitments end, those previous commitments no longer apply to you. And in Jesus, a resurrection is possible in a new kind of life, which just like the bell ringing, the second hand hitting the top of the clock, you step into freedom and possibility. All kinds of new things emerge that can happen differently than before. He goes on to say, just as Christ was raised from the dead by the glorious power of the Father, now we also may live new lives. Some of us need some new in our life, don't we? There's some things that have been wrecking us, holding on to us. And this applies not just to people who have never pointed their lives toward Jesus, though I gotta tell you, if you're someone who has never began cooperating with Jesus, If you've never stepped into a friendship, a relationship with him, it's step number one. It's the best decision you could possibly make. He has so much good in mind for you. He wants that bell to ring. He wants the balance to hit zero, and you step into different kind of freedom, different kind of partnership and connection with him. But followers of Jesus, it's the same story. We find ourselves going back to class, sending off payments that we no longer owe, settling for an identity or some kind of hurt, habit, or hang-up that has found its way into our lives that we think we can't set down anymore, and that's just not true. Paul is saying everything has changed in this new relationship because of what Jesus has done. When we receive and trust what Jesus has done, we enter a brand new relationship. And with it, we receive a new identity. Like the day I put this ring on, I was no longer just Drew. I was Drew, Lane's husband. And that came with all kinds of desire, all kinds of possibility, all kinds of commitments, all kinds of opportunity, all kinds of privilege, all kinds of partnership. So many things shifted in that. Paul paints the same picture in Romans chapter 6 for us when we point our lives toward Jesus. Verses 5 through 9 go something like this. He says, listen, since we have been united, again, you catch the relationship word. We've been united with him. Like we're no longer separate from him. We step into relationship, committed, ongoing, forever marriage kind of relationship with God. Since we have been united with him in his death, we'll also be raised to life. We know that our old sinful selves were crucified with Christ so that sin, catch this, might lose its power in our lives. The moment you trust Jesus, sin has no real power in your life. Only the power you give it. We are no longer slaves to sin. We talked about this last week, that we feel stuck, and while it may feel that way, in Jesus, it's just simply not true. We can cooperate with him. We absolutely owe him nothing else. We owe sin nothing else. We don't have to be stuck in that. It says, for when we died with Christ, we were set free from the power of sin. And since we died with Christ, we know we will also live with him. We're sure of this because Christ was raised from the dead. The pivotal, seminal moment in all of history, Jesus conquered the grave. There is no power greater than him. And since he conquered that, since he did that, it says, since we died with Christ, we know we will also live with him. We're sure of this because Christ was raised from the dead and he will never die again. Death no longer has any power over him. When he died once to break the power of sin. But now that he lives for the glory of God. And so he says, listen, if that's true, if he did that, then everything he said was true. And what he said is, I want to catch you up in all the good that I'm doing. I want to invite you into relationship. And so Paul says it this way in verse 11. And so you also should consider. That word is it's an accounting word. Everybody knows the difference between a income and expenditure, right? We're all very familiar. He's saying you get to move from one column to the other. What was once a debt is now income. It's a moving from one place, a recategorization, a total move completely from one thing to something totally different. He says now you need to reckon or account or write this in a particular column. You are dead to the power of sin and alive to God in Christ. Not partly, not a little bit, entirely. Whatever debt was owed is not paid a little bit and you have a little bit to make up and do your part. No, it's paid entirely, and now we move into a totally different column. He says, consider yourselves dead to the power of sin, but alive in Christ. This is the story that is written in every single one of our lives when we are a follower of Jesus. What was once true and had a hold on our lives, then Jesus, and now something totally different is true. We don't owe anything anymore, which means we have nothing to pay, nothing to prove. We have possibility and freedom. What was once daily alarms, homework, ongoing tests, exhaustion, and stuck is now a bell ringing and a sprint into freedom and possibility. Those of you who follow Jesus, you have a story like this. It's good for us sometimes to just celebrate the kind of stories that God writes in people's lives. There's a guy around here named Jeff. He's been around for a while, and God's been writing a story for a little while. And so to paint a clear picture of what this might look like, a moving from one to the other, a sense of what it is to be stuck, and an invitation and the possibility when we come alive in Jesus. We thought we'd share with you Jeff's story. Check this out.
I was starting to get into a bad crowd in school and was getting into trouble. And so my parents decided to move me to a little town, population 115, called Havensville, Kansas. Tiny little town. I was an outcast. Nobody liked me. I was the city boy. So I had a lot of anger. I wasn't grown up to cry, so the only other option is just be mad. At the age of 16, I stole my first car because I wanted to go back to Kansas City. First time I spent in jail for 2 days, and I have a long history of criminal behavior because of drugs. When I first got married, we loved each other, but we both had an addiction to marijuana. She found her own friends, I found my own friends. We got so distant that I started messing around on them. Vice versa, she did the same. And I just said, I'm done. Packed my clothes, packed my bags, and I walked out the house and didn't turn back and completely abandoned my children. I didn't visit them. I didn't do what a dad should have supposed to have done because I was hooked on drugs, fast women, money, everything that goes along with that. Keep on digging, not finding my bottom. Took me 19 years to find my bottom. That was on the streets for 4 years in a cardboard box. I stayed high 24/7. And I'd get my first $10 and I'd run to the dope man, get my $10, smoke it up real quick, hit the ground, wake up 3 days later, right back to wanting to get high again. Finally, I got mad one morning. I woke up after passing out, after being up for 5, 6, 7, 8 days, not eating. I said, God, I can't live like this anymore. And I did hear a voice when I said that. Give me 24 hours. I said, okay, I'll give you 24 hours. Well, it was really tough. 24 hours is not easy for an addict. And the thought come across my mind, take a long walk. I haven't eaten in days. I'm gonna walk down to the rescue mission and get something to eat. So I was sitting in line at the rescue mission, and my dad hadn't seen me in months. He'd been looking for me, and he found me sitting in line at the rescue mission. And he said, son, get in the van. We need to go to the hospital. I said, what for? He said, I think I'm crazy. I said, Dad, I know you're crazy. Sure, I'll go to the hospital and help you out, because you're crazy, not me. Denial. So I jumped in the van, we went to the hospital, and I don't know what Dad said to the check-in at UMC Hospital, but they handcuffed me and legal 2000 me because they called it. I was hurting myself because of the methamphetamine addiction, and I was put in Relational for 6 weeks. At that point, I was diagnosed with schizophrenia. From there, they put me in a program called Mental Health Court for people who had mental disabilities, and I did 18 months and graduated. So little to say that 24 hours that I felt God told me to give him turned into 18 months of sobriety. When I graduated, I asked my mom and dad, can I move in with you? One of the agreements was moving in this house was joining Celebrate Recovery. So me and my mom had been going to Celebrate Recovery for almost 4 years. I learned how to turn my will over to God. I'm not perfect by any means. As we say, there's times where I take over the steering wheel, but then I know enough about my past. When I start veering a little bit to the right, I go back into prayer and I get close to God again, and I give the wheel back to him, If it wasn't for Celebrate Recovery teaching me how to get out of my isolation, I was able to reach out to my son. I had no relationship with him for 19 years, and it was surprising that he reached back.
How it feels to have my dad back. Oh man, it's actually amazing. He invited me to Celebrate Recovery. I initially went to support my dad. When I went, I was nervous. It was very odd to me, a new experience. I understood that there was a family there, a family environment, that people were very accepting from all walks of life. Not only were they talking about Jesus, but they were talking about how, your past does not define you. Your definition is within Jesus, and that was really what hit me hard.
It was him saying, I want to get baptized, that led me. I said, yeah, let's do it. This time around, having a sponsor, a solid accountability team, a brotherhood at Celebrate Recovery, that is the fertile soil. And it's kept me sober as long as I've got right now, coming up on 4 years. My life is completely different. I've got a family again. My parents have forgiven me. My son has forgiven me. My daughter's forgiven me. I got a relationship with them. Miracles can happen in your life. It happened in mine.
Listen, I'm just going to take the opportunity to make a shameless plug for Celebrate Recovery on Friday nights. If any of you are finding your way in something you simply cannot get past, it need not be drug addiction. It could be. They're very helpful in that. It need not be alcohol addiction. Could be codependency. Could be an addiction to purchasing. Could be just something, a hurt, a habit, or a hang-up that you just simply have not been able to get past. There is no more authentic, transparent, and committed group of people to change and inviting Jesus to help with that than Celebrate Recovery. They meet Friday nights here at 6 p.m. Find your way there. If you know and love someone who just cannot get past and you're not exactly sure how to help people get past something, it's a great group of people without any shame or judgment to meet you right where you are and walk forward. But listen, while Jeff's story is so dramatic, some of our addiction to work is no less strong than his to methamphetamine. Some of our addiction and hurts and habits along the way are still wrecking our lives. And the question becomes, from this moment forward, would you realign your relationships in a way that create freedom instead of obligation? If it's really true that what Jesus accomplished, if Paul is right, that we are no longer slaves to sin, then staying where you are is not the only option. There is strength, there is partnership beyond you that can take you somewhere new, full of possibility instead of stuck obligation. It's why it says so well, I love this in Romans 6:22. It says, now that you've found that you don't have to listen to sin tell you what to do. Your anger with your family doesn't have to control you anymore. Your obligation to what other people think doesn't need to control you anymore. Your dream or desire for a certain amount and the struggle of exhausting yourself to get there doesn't have to control you anymore. You don't have to listen to sin tell you what to do. And as you discover this depth or the delight of listening to God telling you, what a surprise. Here's what's going to happen. A whole, healed, put back together life right now. You saw it in Jeff's story, didn't you? With more and more life on the way. We all know what sitting in class feels like. We all know what it is to write the payment. Imagine what it must be like to run in the freedom of summer when the balance hits zero. And so what do? Paul says this, he says, listen, don't let sin control the way you live. You don't have to agree with that. You can say no, and you can walk your way forward with the support of great people with God's Spirit alive in us. We don't have to let those things control us anymore. We don't have to give in to sinful desires. Don't let any part of your body become an instrument of evil to serve sin. I love this, what he says. He takes this word instrument, literally means tool. What can you do with a hammer? You can build a beautiful place to live, or you can really wreck a car. Two totally different options. We've all experienced this idea of working and partnering with things that damage us and other people. What Jesus says is stop. You don't have to do that anymore. You don't owe it anymore. Instead, you can build something beautiful. He says, don't let sin control your lives. Instead, give yourselves completely to God, for you were dead, but now you've come to new life. So use your whole body as an instrument to do what is right for the glory of God. The beauty of what Jesus accomplished is that we get to choose. And so here's the question I just want to ask you. Who will you cooperate with? Will you cooperate with all the things in life that have been wrecking you along the way, missing the mark, coming up short of a relationship with God? Sin is what it's called. Will you cooperate with that? Or instead, accept Jesus' invitation to partner with the Spirit? We get to choose the difference. And we get to take on this new identity, like a wedding day stepping into a marriage, placing a ring on our fingers and walking in a different kind of partnership. Baptism is that moment. You'll see some folks, if you hang around for a little bit, get baptized after this service. You come to Night of Worship on the 27th, you'll see people do this, a burial of an old life. So we are no longer slaves to sin, and a resurrection to a new kind of life because of Jesus. We don't have to continue to live the way we were living before. Instead, we can invite the Spirit to change us. We can step in to a new relationship. The best decision you could ever make is to begin cooperating with Jesus. We say it this way around here, join Jesus. Since we were joined with him in baptism, why would we live in that old way any longer? Since we've been united with him in his death, we also be united with him in a new kind of life, full of possibility, freedom, victory over all the stuff, triumph, the scripture said, over the stuff that's been wrecking our lives. When we invite Jesus to partner, when we step into a new relationship, yes, our behavior changes because our relational commitments change. We walk with one who is stronger, one who is loving, one who forgives, one who calls us by our real name, one who has adopted us and invited us in. He invites us into this family of people who walk alongside us, speaking our true identity over us, supporting us in all the ways that we need to step into a fresh way of life, for reminding us and supporting us to never go back to the way things were. We don't have to settle for that. We died to that. We don't owe it anything. So listen, some of you have never pointed your lives toward Jesus. If you want to begin cooperating with Jesus, there is nothing stopping you except you saying yes. That's it. And start out on a journey walking with him. If you've seen enough of Jesus to say, I want to work with him to build a way better life, he has made all of that possible. He will lead. And yeah, there'll be moments like Jeff said where we try to take the wheel and we're like, whoop, this is not good. You do the thing. But we should begin like a commitment to live life together, a new relationship that comes with new behavior. We step into something brand new. I encourage you, if you've never given your life to Jesus in baptism, you should do that. You should tell somebody right now if that's what you think you should do. Just throw an elbow and say, I want to talk about that. I think I might want to do that. What else do I need to know about that? There's people around our campus who would love to stand with you and help you with that if you want. But you get to choose. Stay right where you are, keep wrecking stuff in you and other people around you, or let the bell ring, let the balance hit zero, let Jesus step into your life, his Spirit come alive in you, which is what we'll talk all about next week, and all kinds of new freedom and possibility emerge along the way. It's a choice that you get to make, and it's a choice that all of us followers of Jesus make every single day. I love the way James Clear says it. He says, every action you take is a vote for the type of person you wish to become. Every action you take is a vote for the type of person you want to become. Around here, as often as possible, we vote, I want to be a person who lives with Jesus' help. I want to be a person who lives in Jesus' way. Baptism is the beginning of that journey, but we make that same choice over and over because he goes on to say, no single instance will transform your beliefs. But as the votes build up, so does the evidence of your new identity. New relationships bring new identity. And so we have this opportunity, followers of Jesus, to use our whole body as an instrument to do what is right for the glory of God and stop partnering with things that we owe nothing to. We can step out of anger. We can step out of achievement. We can step out of desperation. We can step out of hopelessness. We can step out of frustration. We can step out of judgment. We can step out of all kinds of things. We don't owe it anymore. We get to choose all kinds of different things, like listening to God together, like I've been doing with these guys. A bunch of people have been doing these in good news studies all across the city, just listening to God together, discovering his character and his plan, and cooperating with him instead of all the stuff that was wrecking our lives, and doing that together and supporting it. We can confess together, which just means agree that we've been messing stuff up. Let's just name the ways we've been partnering with our old way of life. Say, I don't want to do that anymore. Ask for support for some people around us and live in the freedom of summer instead of sitting in the desk. And instead of just hearing from him and naming our failures, to beginning to cooperate with God and his people to build something different. We've been raised to a new kind of life. We don't have to live in the old way anymore. We owe nothing to that. You don't owe anything anymore. It's good news. We serve him together because when we served ourselves, we just wrecked stuff and people around us. But instead, as we serve God and others, we come alive and so do they. And we give together because God is generous and we are generous. And that shapes our heart away from the stuff that tried to rule and wreck our lives, the obligations along the way. Now, in the generosity, we watch God fill our lives with what we need so that we can show up in helpful ways in love in others' lives. Listen, it doesn't have to be the way it's been. You don't have to live like that anymore. You owe nothing to all of that. And so we get to show up. And maybe above everything, followers of Jesus, we get to share good news together. To walk into coffee shops, to our work, to our neighborhood, to our homes, and say, you don't have to live like this. It doesn't have to be this way. You don't owe anything anymore. You actually get to choose. And the way we show up with generosity and kindness can actually invite people in Jesus' direction together.
So this week, let's join Jesus. He changes everything, puts us in a fresh place full of possibility, out of being stuck. Whether it's your first step in getting baptized or choosing again to gather with other believers to confess, celebrate, discover all the things that we do to invite the Spirit's work in our lives, let's lean in together. If we can support you in any way, we'd love to. Head over to canyonridge.org. You'll find everything you need as well as a way to reach out to someone for help. Don't forget to share this with a friend, hit the subscribe button, and we'll see you soon.